Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about the new lords, heroes, and units available for the High Elves in the Tides of Torment DLC, starting with Lord Aislinn on foot. He does have mount options. A Skycutter has a mount option, a Star Dragon has a mount option, which Grave Assembly has talked about. I just want to look at him on foot, because what Skycutters and Star Dragons do as mount choices, well, that's very clear. Besides, I do have the Seahelm with the Skycutter, I have the Mage with the Skycutter, and we all know what dragons do as mounts in terms of how they change their stats. But anyway, he has 90 armor. As a lord, as a legendary lord, he does have martial mastery available to him, assuming I can actually select them properly. So he has martial mastery, sacred incense, and of course wounds. In terms of ability, he does have a melee skill line. He has access to the Iron-Handed Captain ability. This is going to be especially useful for Oceanids, not necessarily regular units. So once leadership is broken, you can use Iron-Handed Captain to restore leadership and rally units. He does have a Potion of Toughness in Skirmish and the Master of Mists ability, which gives range, armor-piercing missile damage, base missile damage, reload skill, stock, and snipe. Now, one of the funny things about this specific ability is it works on artillery. So if we look at modern Skycutters with bolt throwers, they have 250 range by default. If we use Master of Mists, that range gets buffed to 500. Any unit that walks in that radius is going to have their range increase. We'll get into the Skycutters in just a bit. But that is Aislinn. He's the High Elven version of Lokir, dual wield, really good in combat directly, and can ride the dragon. Really, the final showdown is going to be Aislinn and Lokir. Then we have a Seahelm. Now on foot, they have a halberd and a shield, but on a Skycutter mount, which I imagine you're going to be using that a lot in the campaign, they have martial prowess. They lose the shield that benefit because, yeah, while they might have the shield, the mount doesn't have the shield. They have stand your ground. They're pretty good in melee. They have golden shield, which reduces melee attack for enemies in range in 35 meters. They have the gauntlets, armor, bonus versus large armor damage resistance if a large enemy presence is in ability range. So you do get that kind of benefit. You do get momentum. But yeah, they're just basically halberd and shield lore choice. That's what they do right there. And they have a chariot as a mount, a flying chariot as a mount. So those Skycutters, they're fairly fast. They have a pretty sizable charge bonus, and this applies to the Skycutters themselves as units. We'll get into those in just a moment. Then we have Caradryan, our legendary hero. Caradryan on foot has martial mastery. He does have a bunch of melee skills that we can see over here. In terms of his unique skills, though, he does have Mark of Asuryan, which does a lot of damage per second if enemy HP is less than 20% in an area and things are grounded, causes severe damage to combatants. And then he has as active ability, as a unique active ability, has the Phoenix Blade. Base weapon damage, armor-piercing weapon damage, bonus versus large. On top of that, he has Captain of the Phoenix Guard, which gives physical resistance and heals for an entity that's small. So this is going to work on infantry, basically. That is pretty useful. Keeps things alive if they're taking a lot of damage. It won't work on monsters. Then you have him on a Phoenix, and it's a pretty cool-looking bird, I gotta say, right there. So what the bird gives him, and that's, why does that stick? There we go. He gets magical attacks, he gets frostfire attacks, so he reduces speed, weakness to fire damage for enemies. He's got flaming attacks, of course. Inherently, he has the Blessed Aura available on that Phoenix mount, so he's reducing speed, charge speed, base weapon damage, melee attack, and armor-piercing damage for enemies in range, while still being very, very deadly in a combat situation. And then he has attuned to magic, which is a ward save type ability. If your Winds of Magic is 15 or greater. So if your Winds of Magic goes down, you obviously lose that ability, but you get damage resistance and magical attacks while it is high, because of the Phoenix right there. Then we move on to the Mist Mage. Various mount options. The important one is obviously the Skycutter. So Mist Mage, Arcane Conduit, Evasion, Martial Prowess, and of course, Wounds. Now, in terms of what they have, so they have Very Fast, they have Spellcaster. As an ability, they have Null Stone, which negates magical weapons within an effect area. 45-second duration, 120-second cooldown. The area is what you see around him. That's what's going to be affected. In terms of Lore of Mists, you get Vigor Recovery, immune to contact effects through the Shroud ability. You get the Spite ability, Mathland Spite, reducing speed, vigor per second, causing damage to combatants. You get Walk Between Worlds with speed, physical resistance, and Strider. Imagine using that on a Merworm or on a Star Dragon. Then we have the ROR, which reduces armor and missile block chance, not just for one enemy, but up to 5 enemies, and it can spread between them. So this can be very useful towards buffing enemies. I think it would be great against Chosen, actually. Then we have the ultimate ability, which is Riding Mist, missile block chance, plus 30, 360 missile block, stock snipe, reduces leadership and melee defense for enemies. And it is an ability you use in a certain location. So yes, it can work on artillery. Jeez, imagine using this baby on, again, Hellstorm. Because the thing about Snipe, what Snipe does is it allows you to shoot while being in stealth undetected. So if you say start with artillery hidden, you can then use this ability to give them Snipe so they can shoot and people can see him. And then he can summon 2 Oceanids, at least in Skirmish right here. So limited usage effect. It does cost Winds of Magic, but you don't have a limited Oceanids. Now, what's my perspective on the Lore of Mists? Obviously, the Mist Mage on Skycutter is a useful hero. Well, I think it depends on how hero capacity is going to be handled and how that's going to interact with regular mages. In Skirmish and PvP, it depends on the enemy you're dealing with, of course, and the kind of army composition you have. But in campaigns, generally speaking, with Magic, you want to focus more on direct damage spells as opposed to buffs and debuffs. And the reason behind that is you have limited mages, you have limited magic, you're dealing with a lot of foes, and the way you win battles in a campaign is you inflict as much damage as quickly as possible on an enemy. So buffing and debuffing, not necessarily as important, but again, it depends on the enemies you're dealing with in the situation and how hero capacity works in a campaign. If they share a recruitment capacity with regular mages, I think they'll be less useful. If they don't, they'll be more useful. Think of Skaven with Ancient Sorcerers versus Plague Priests, as opposed to, you know, just having different capacity for different types of mages. Anyway, moving on to the units, we start with Ship Company. Ship Company, compared to Spearmen, they have less armor than Spearmen. They do have more weapon strength, but they lose the bonus versus large. Spearmen are going to be better as general purpose units because they have charge reflection, they have charge defense versus large. But the important thing about Ship Company, the army of the clones that they are, they have aquatic. So they have a higher charge bonus, they do more weapon strength, but they do have that aquatic benefit, which, given the fact that this is a naval theme DLC, and we will, at least in a campaign perspective, based on what Creative Assembly has shown publicly, we will be dealing with a lot of naval situations, so island battles, which means there's going to be water. You can position them in the water, they don't suffer the debuffs, enemies that walk into the water will. So yeah, they're also cheaper than Spearmen, so they're basically a chaff unit. I think they're actually the cheapest High Elven unit, if I'm not mistaken on that specific purpose. But that's the role of Ship Company. Again, based on what CA has shown us publicly in the vid and the stream, they are recruited from Tier 1, very easily recruitable, very cheap to recruit. Then we have the Regiment Renowned version of the Company of Caradryan. Now, these are ship company with great axes, and honestly, there is a point where, as a player, I would really wish we could just unlock unlimited regiments renown in a campaign perspective. We can for, certain rules in skirmish, but it would be great for campaign. I don't think there's a mod on that, but anyway. So what ship company do with gray axes, what the Company of Caradryan does, is they're basically discount White Alliance with aquatic. Kind of important to understand that. They still have aquatic, they do have armor piercing, they do have less armor versus White Alliance, but very, very importantly, they do have more melee attack, though less weapon strength and less weapon defense. The reason is they have martial mastery, whereas regular White Lions don't. Regular White Lions have martial prowess. So this unit is very cheap. It is a ship company, so they are available pretty quickly, I believe, and they are very cheap compared to White Lions of Crix. Also, there's more entities for them, so obviously, Regiment Renown versus regular unit you can recruit en masse, but yes, I think the ship company Regiment Renown is better than White Lions. Partly availability, partly entities, aquatic, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, again, different purposes, because you look at White Lions, they have Woodsmen, they do have 30% missile resistance, and those are not irrelevant, especially given the fact you might be fighting against a lot of Dark Elves in High Elven campaigns. Actually, you do fight against a lot of Dark Elves in High Elven campaigns, so just a point to be made there. Then we have Sword Masters of Hoeth versus the Blades of Hoeth, the new Regiment Renown based on Sword Masters. Now, the difference is basically the Regiment Renown is better in every way compared to Sword Masters of Hoeth. They get more leadership, they get magical attacks, they get more melee attack, more melee defense, and also they get Guardian as an ability for Lords and Heroes, physical resistance, and they get a ton of spell resistance. But both of them do have martial mastery, but yes, these guys are better in every single way. They're going to be better against targets with high physical resistance, so demons, savage orcs, all that kind of stuff. And they're going to really act like the bodyguards that Sword Masters should be. Again, I refer to what I said about the Company of Caradryan. Would be nice to have unlimited regiments right now. Even if they cost, like, one of the things to be said about unit variety is you're always going to have to consider the upkeep, boys and girls. Like, you can't ignore that. You want to know what prevents you from doom stacking? Unit cost. If you recruit too many units that are high quality, you're not going to have as many armies, which means you can't deal with as much of the campaign map as you otherwise would. People have asked me if Lauder and Sea Guard with shields have aquatic. They do. I don't think they do in the live version. Pretty sure that is the case. I don't really use Lauder and Sea Guard in a campaign, so I can't really tell you how they were before, and I'm not a PvP player. But based on what I know, they don't in the live version, they do here. So I think that's likely a change that they've made over here to make Lauder and Sea Guard more useful. Then we have our Skycutters and our Skycutters with bolt throwers. In terms of melee stats, they're both the same units, and they're actually pretty good chariots, I think. The reason they're good chariots, one, they have very high charge bonus. Their melee stats are not terrible. Yes, not as much melee attack, melee defense, but they're very fast, and they're flying. So you can swoop in, do some damage, and get out of there. Swooping is bad, and these guys are really good at swooping. They have pretty good armor, all things considered. And the regular Skycutters do have magical attacks. They have reverb bows. So they do a lot of damage. They fire while moving. They have momentum. So keep in mind this. They have fire while moving. You know, CA did remove that from gyrocopters, which I think is a shame. But keep in mind, based on what CA has shown in their video and their stream, these are tier 3 units. I mean, the game itself, and here it says it's tier 3. It also says that for the bolt throwers, which based on CA's video and stream, they are available at tier 4. Keep in mind that recruitment situation. So basically, these guys are kind of like the equivalent of higher level gyrocopters, or natural hammer torpedo gyrocopters. And they're also better than gyrocopters because even though they don't have the bombs, which you might think is a downside, but it's not really. They don't have the bombs, but they have fewer entities per unit. So that means their pathfinding is better. Any chariot unit that has more than 4 entities per unit is going to struggle, especially if they're flying. That's one of the problems with gyrocopters and the changes they made in Friends of the King. So these guys are really good in melee and range. They can harass. Now, one of the things to point out, their armor piercing is not great, so they're more about harassing enemy ranged, harassing enemy artillery, rather than doing any meaningful damage from that perspective. If the enemy is armored. If they're not armored, obviously they'll obliterate them, but keep in mind, they do have a longer reload time and not as many projectiles, so keep that aspect in mind. Then we have Skycutter bolt throwers. Yeah, these are the equivalent of Trollhammer torpedoes or gyro bombers for the High Elves. They have armor piercing, bonus versus large, they fly, they have a good amount of range, good amount of ammunition, and they're a flying artillery piece that can fire while moving. You probably want to stop with them if you're looking to do damage. But yeah, these guys are amazing. Tier 4 though, based on what Creative Assembly showed publicly. Then we have the Oceanids, so the smaller elementals. These guys are available pretty quickly. They're fairly cheap. They're a defender unit, so they're not really there to do a lot of damage, because, yeah, their damage is not necessarily going to be great. Keep in mind, their stats might look fine, but remember how many entities there are, because it is per entity. They do have missile resistance, physical resistance, immune to contact defense, perfect victor, strider, but they're also elemental. So once their leadership is broken, they take a lot of damage to self. Think of like Kadai for Chaos Dwarves, and you understand this. Not as much, nowhere near as much damage as Kadai, but more a defensive unit than Kadai. These guys are meant to pin the enemy in place, and that's literally what the defender trait mentions. They're there to pin the enemy in place, so other things can position. Basically, your range units can kill the enemy. Then we have the big boy, the big sea elemental. Feels like a basilisk from Harry Potter. A very angry basilisk. Anyway, so what the sea elemental... Come on, tooltip. Yeah, bit of bugs. That's been an issue for a while, by the way, and it's not a TOT issue. But anyway, these guys are a big single entity that has the Riding Mists ability, so that's a bounce spell that they have to give themselves a lot of resistance, but they basically have the same purpose. They're just bigger, stronger, meaner, all that kind of stuff than Oceanids, but roughly the same exact purpose. They do have siege attacker, Oceanids don't. Very importantly, beyond the fact that, of course, they also work as elementals, when they die, they summon a weaker unit of Oceanids once dropping below 25% health, and they do damage on that as well. So throw the sea elemental in the middle of the enemy army, let it get killed, and blow up the enemy army. Great tactic. Well, not necessarily for a campaign, but I guess for skirmish and all that. Then we have Merworms. The Regiment Renowned Merworm, and also to compare to a Star Dragon. Now, Merworms are big. They're fast for a land unit. They're not as fast as flying units, but they're pretty fast. They've got... they have a bronze shield, though they don't have as much armor as a Star Dragon. But I'm going to point out, the Merworms are very different than a Star Dragon. Would a Merworm beat a Star Dragon? Yes, easily. A Charybdis would beat a Star Dragon easily as well, because Star Dragons are not meant to be monster killers. Merworms are, so are Charybdises. That's why Charybdises beat Star Dragons. It's a question of anti-large. Charybdises have poison, if I'm not mistaken, but you do have cumbersome, so your attacks are slower. So even though they do a lot of damage, their attacks are slower. But against single entities, Merworms are basically big, giant targets they throw against single entities. That's their role, that's their purpose. And they're also good in siege situations because they have the wall breaker capability. So what they have in terms of ability, they do have aquatic, so not something to be ignored. They do have abyssal cloak, so that gives them missile block chance, missile block, reduces leadership of enemies in range if leadership is higher than broken, so bear that aspect in mind. They do have regeneration, which makes them vulnerable to fire. Kind of weird, the water creature to be vulnerable to fire. Feels a bit weird, CA. But okay, we'll roll with it. But yeah, they have fire weakness, missile resistance 25% because of bronze shield and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, abyssal cloak. Then we have Silak One-Eye. He's the bigger, more expensive version of it. And he does have a couple of things, useful things, or one useful thing compared to a regular Merworm. He's got the Enfeebling Cold, which reduces charge bonus, melee attack, and charge speed for enemies within 35 meters. But yes, he does have one eye, as opposed to having both eyes on a regular Merworm. These things are deadly, but again, they're expensive. Actually, they're the most expensive unit in the High Elven roster. One of the things to mention, people complained about Thunder Barges for dwarves, and even at launch, Thunder Barges were the most expensive unit for dwarves, so how many of them you could bring in a battle was a big discussion. I personally never used Thunder Barges in a campaign because of the cost and the tier requirements. We'll see about Merworms in that kind of situation. Their cost, but yeah, they're both very expensive. This one is 3k. A Star Dragon is what, 2.2k to recruit? You can get Star Dragons easier, and it's a different purpose of a unit. Like Star Dragons, they're meant to deal with enemy blobs. Merworms are meant to deal with enemy single entities or heroes or lords mounted on something, on dragons, on horses, anything like that. That's what Merworms will do. They will kill lords and heroes and single entities in general. So that is the situation for the High Elves with the Titans of Torment DLC in terms of units, lords, and heroes. It's pretty good stuff. I think the big question mark I have in terms of all of this good stuff is, like, you know, campaign availability. We'll find out as we get closer to release. Because one of the things I would like to point out about all of this at the moment, in the corner you have development in progress. Things can and are subject to change. I'm not going to go into what CA has done for Tides of Torment. And I'm not going to break any embargo, but all I will say is that with Omens of Destruction, with Thrones of Decay, even with Shadows of Change, if I'm not mistaken, there were plenty of changes between pre-release and the actual release. So keep that in mind, subject to change, worth saying it.